Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains, episode number 1037. 1037. I mean, we're getting that close to our 20th anniversary, which is hard to believe. 20 years of WeatherBrains. About 2 months away. It's the end of December. We started in late December of '06. Wow. They said we wouldn't last. What do they know? They know nothing. So, for those that don't know, this is the pre show. If you're looking for the actual show content, move the slider over about 8 minutes. But this is the pre show. It's a magical part of the program where we traditionally do three things here. We share, number one, boring personal stories, sometimes really boring. Number two, we share humorous anecdotes. And number three, from time to time, we say really outrageous things. And Jen is back
Hello.
in Ohio.
Yep. And you can blame me. All the cold, all the snow. My
Hang
fault.
on, let me fix my mic. I think it's me.
Uh-oh.
Hang on 1 second here. Oh, I see what I've done. We have a problem. That's me. Now I can hear you.
Hello. Yeah, well, I was just saying how
Hello.
much you can love me, the fact that I'm in Ohio. You can blame me again for the cold and the snow.
Right. We have to blame it on somebody. It's
Yeah.
cold and dreary, and it's coming from the higher latitudes. And for all these years, you were our higher latitude correspondent, and you're back in the
I'm
higher
back.
latitudes.
That's right.
So, and your video and audio, it's great. You got
Thank
good
you.
bandwidth. It's everything's very good here.
Yay. Yep. Things are good.
Uh,
I'm hanging out with the family and going to be here for the holiday, so it's awesome. A little trip in the week works this week, going to a conference and speaking on Saturday. It's that National Weather Network, Ben Luna's group. So I'll be down there.
oh yeah,
I'm doing a
the
nomad talk on Saturday. Yeah.
National Digital Weather Network. Wow, that's
Yep.
outstanding. I wish I could attend, but most people think that weather folks, we sit around and yak away for about 2 minutes a few times a day, and that's it. The truth is, we we work pretty long hours. My first opening for a school program is now fall of 2027. The whole 26, 27 years booked up with schools. Multiple schools a day. They're crammed in. And, it's just, but I somehow need to be. When does this thing start, Jen? Is it this week?
Yeah, it starts this week. It's Thursday dinner, and then Friday there's talks all day, starting at 9 o'clock, and all day Saturday. So, and then some dinners, and it's going to be really great. There's a huge lineup. Ryan Hall speaking. Um, Mar. Oh, can't think of his name. Oh my gosh, I'm having a moment. Lobbin from Mississippi.
Max Velocity?
He's
Who?
not speaking. No. Mississippi, the Mississippi Digital Group.
Uh, Matt Laubon.
Laban. Yeah. I know
Yes.
he's speaking. Jeff Petrowski will be speaking. So a lot of
Ooh,
Barron folk.
that'll. Yeah, Ben really started this, with the Tennessee Valley Weather operation, and he's in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. For those that don't know, and what we've done, he's helped us, and he's helped Matt. He's helped so many launch their own network. And the truth is, you don't need a transmitter or an FCC license. Anybody can be anybody with a phone is a broadcaster. And why restrict yourself to the old school when you can get into the new school world? In it, you can reach more people, and you have more freedom, and you could have more resources, and you can. I've never had this many resources in my life. And I'm old as dirt, and I lived through the glory days of television. I lived through the Ron Burgundy years of the 1980s and the 1990s, and here we are in 2025. I have more people, more equipment, more resources than I've ever had, and it's on the digital side. And Ben is one of the pioneers. So I really wish I could attend that. In fact, I'll be up in the Tennessee Valley tomorrow at a school, in two schools, as a matter of fact. But I've got to come right back and go to work. I'm a working stiff. I see John Gordon, the great American, is on the line.
Hello,
Anytime
Neil.
John's here,
How
it's going
are
to be.
you?
Okay.
Good to see you, Eagle.
Uh,
Hello, Owen. Um,
oh,
so
Owen,
I had to
can you hear
go.
us? Oh,
Yes, I
go
can.
ahead,
Can you hear
John.
me?
Great. Listen, John's got a story. When John's got a story, we all stop and listen. So go ahead, John.
I had to go into the TV station for the 5, 6, and 6:30 because of the. Oh, and this is a bad word in the South. It begins with the letter S. Okay, the
Woo,
letter
woo,
S
woo.
causes mass hysteria.
Panic in
Wait,
the
wait,
streets.
sorry.
Panic in the streets.
It's you were at the Joint Typhoon Weather Center. This is the other. This is not a super typhoon. This is the word snow. People freak out.
Yes.
No, immediately when they hear that word down here, their underwear will start flapping up and down their legs. Veins will come out on their necks. Smoke comes out of their ears, and they flock to stores buying items like Yoo-Hoos and Twinkies. It's a very strange social situation that most people don't understand. Um, but I'm just thankful, John, that we did not have that problem down on the Interstate 20 band down here. It's all your problem. How was your forecast? Did it work?
Well, it's for tomorrow. It's for late tonight, tomorrow.
Oh! It's for this. Okay, it's for
Yeah, it's
this
this wave
incoming.
coming up. Yeah, and it's pretty funny. Some of the I better watch what I say. Some people who are alleged forecasters have ranges that the slider scale. The scale's going like this, James.
Oh,
I
I
mean, 1 to 12.
yeah, yeah. Hey, you're guaranteed to be right no matter what happens. No, I like to approach it where I give a best case scenario, worst case scenario, and the most likely scenario.
That's
The
what I do.
range of possibilities. Good. Then that's the right way to do it. It's just the probabilistic type approach that we talked about for years and years and years, thanks to our friend Kim here. And I think that that's just the right way to do it. So, but I saw Kansas City had a good little snow today. St. Louis, of course, over the weekend, we had the big Chicago snow. It's been fun. So Owen, please don't hang up on us. I promise. We will get to the show here in just a second. Here we have to wait for 45 more seconds. We start at the top of the hour, and we will bring you in. And just to give Owen fair warning, we are streaming on YouTube Live. And we'll start the produced podcast version at the top of the hour that's recorded and goes out by audio. Ooh, ooh. What is
I got
this?
this at a store. Can I say what store?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Cracker Barrel has this amazing lighthouse. It's a tornado. It's in the lobby. Excellent. It's a great gift for
Really?
Christmas.
That's outstanding. Man, I need one of those things. So you like the little store in the Cracker Barrel when you go in there, all that
Yeah,
stuff they
when
said
you
they've
walk
got a.
in.
Oh
I
wow.
need that. I need
We're
that.
in. Let's welcome our television viewers. And let me just say, for those that are watching on the television side, it is raining tonight, but this is a cold, stable air mass. No storms, no thunder, no lightning, and it's not cold enough for snow or ice, just good old fashioned rain, which is what we need. So, having said that, let's get this thing underway here. And we'll start track number one and track number two. And here we go in five, four, three, two, one. Ah, yes, most marvelous time of the year. WeatherBrains, episode number 1032nd, as number 1037, 1037. And we are into the month of December. I'm so excited about Christmas. We are into that great season. We're past Thanksgiving. Most people are in a good mood. So I'm in a good mood, and this is going to be a good show tonight. And for a lot of us, we are kind of flirting with having some winter weather issues. Kim, do you have any slipping and sliding going on in Oklahoma City today?
We did, and I'll pass off to Rick Smith here to talk about the bulk of that. But I will say, when I woke up this morning, saw the advisory, winter weather advisory, I immediately went outside to see, okay, what can I see? What's the situation in my backyard? Completely iced over. It was just a winter wonderland back there. We had just everything was coated, solid sheet. And I thought, oh gosh, are we going to have trouble getting out of my neighborhood? We're in sort of a hilly part of town. That can be fun. to navigate in the ice and get out. But I looked out my front door, nothing. So the dividing line appears to have been my house. There's something about my roof we've already talked about in this show before. It's like some kind of magical portal or something. But yeah, we were fine in much of town, but from my yard east, there were issues, as I understand it, and north. And Rick can tell you the rest of the story.
So Magical Portal is our first working show title for this episode. So Rick, give us a breakdown from your end. How did the wintry situation go this morning?
Kim, it's kind of like the show Stranger Things. There's all this weird supernatural stuff going on at somebody's house. I think you're the you're one of the portals or doors or gates or whatever they call it. So, yeah, it was one of these horrible freezing drizzle, light freezing rain events that are so hard to predict, to detect, to tell people about, and for people to see on the road. And I think there were OHP said they had like 250, 260 accidents this morning, all on bridges and overpasses, all early this morning. So yeah, some of the highest impact winter weather events we have here are freezing drizzle that you can't see, can't predict, and people just get on the road, drive to work, and their day, week, month is ruined. So yeah, I think we even had a couple of fatalities. I haven't heard the details of that, but it was a bad morning from, like Kim said, the north part of Norman northward through the metro, and that persisted well into the morning. So not a good start to the day or the week. But it is.
And I will say from your friends along Interstate 20, it's the same thing here. The freezing drizzle, it's the worst. It's hard to message. You can't see it on radar. When people look at their phone, they don't see anything, and maybe they didn't check the weather, and they get out there and they just don't know, and it's early. We have the same problem here as well. I noticed Adelot's not on the show. He was not in one of those crashes, was he?
I don't think so. I think he's got I think he's okay. It's his
okay.
It's a kid sports thing or something, I think.
He's going with his kids somewhere tonight.
Yeah.
Okay, so he was not in one of the fender benders on ice in Tulsa this morning. That's good.
Not that he told us about.
Let's go to another snow correspondent, the great John Gordon. We heard your voice, John. You have a little episode coming tonight. So how much snow are we going to get, John? Tell us.
Hey, Eagle One. I'll just say this really quick. Freezing drizzle, better known as Fizz Diz. Fizz Diz is not good. Okay. It is. I mean, with freezing rain, that's bad. Everyone knows when you say freezing rain or glaze or ice, right? Eagle, bad. Freezing drizzle is like, who cares? I'm going to drive Fizz Diz. I don't care. What's Fizz Diz? But tonight for Louisville, I think we got a 1 to 2 inch event. If you're going on I-71, listen to WeatherBrains tonight. Not good. Not going to Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland. As George Bush Sr. would say, very bad, not good.
And so now I've got Magical Portal and Fizz Diz. I have two show title possibilities here just in the first 10 minutes of this show. That's outstanding. So let's go the other way. Let's go down to South Texas and Troy Kimmel. And the Texas Longhorns, boy, what a win they had. Goodness, did you see that coming, Troy?
You expect me to answer that? The whole thing with football is, you got to execute. And my Aggies did not execute in the second half of that ballgame. And so as a result, Texas won, and they deserved the win. So, and by the way, I want to just mention here, this is totally off the road here. But, I'm glad to have Owen with us tonight. And I'm on his partner emails out of WPC and enjoy those. And now I see where y'all brought him in just to embarrass me about the fact that he can organize a bookshelf, and I cannot do it back here. Owen, welcome to the show, but I'm going to call you because I need to talk about that. This is, this is dumpster world here. So
I was just happy to see another bookshelf.
I'm not sure that's what you call that back there, but thank you, Owen. No, it's 40 degrees. 40 degrees or so in Austin.
And, wow. You're under 90.
Yeah, we're under 90 for a change. I asked for it. And we went from 90 in the last few weeks to 40 right now. There was no fall. I don't know about y'all, but
Wow.
in South Texas, there has been no fall. So,
Wow. So I've got Magical Portal, Fizz Diz, and Dumpster World. We have
yeah.
3 working show titles already, and we're 7 minutes into the show here.
Yep.
Jen, do you want to? You got anything for us? Up is it snowing in Ohio? You're back in Ohio. We
Oh,
we
yeah.
talked about it in the pre-show. Explain where you are. You're kind of back home.
I am. I'm back home. And so, did you all notice that the weather completely went down the crapper after I started moving back north?
Right down the tubes. Right down the
Yep. As
tubes.
soon as I
Yeah.
started heading back north, everything got cold and snowy, and we're not even flirting with the snow. We are in the midst of it right now. Everything outside is coated. I am currently with my family, and I'll be here for through the holidays. So it's been great to be back home and see everybody. So I'm currently in my mom's basement, and I have books. As you see, I get it naturally. My love for books and everything, genealogy, history, both mom and dad. So, but no, it's been good. Just a little snowy. So we're about to get, I think, 2 to 4 here, maybe up to 5. So hooray!
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh. Awesome. It's a snowy night in Ohio and Kentucky. And your shirt says "Gone Bald." Is this a statement on somebody on the show here? I
It
mean,
is not. No, it's from. I love this shirt. It's from Bald Top Brewing uh, in Virginia. When I was there in the Shenandoah Valley, they had really great wineries and brew places. So I heard, and I may have stopped at one. This one, Bald Top Brewing.
all right. And I'm going to write down "Gone Bald" as another show title potential here. It's a show title bonanza here. So let's see here. Who's going to introduce Owen formally? John, is that you? Is this? Are you the introducer here, or Troy, or
This
who?
was actually mine.
Yeah, this
Oh,
is Kim.
Kim,
Yeah.
please, let's bring in our guest and formally introduce this man.
Oh, happy to do so. And I will say, to tee this show up, we're going to be doing a show that brings in more WPC folks that John has been helping to orchestrate. And I think we just got that solidified, Owen's nodding his head, for next week. So this week, we're giving a preview of that by talking with WPC's WCM, Warning Coordination Meteorologist. And today, it's a kind of fireside chat. What made Dr. Owen Shea? How did he come to be in this position? And all the things that he has brought with him into that role. I think what's going to be so delightful about this show is that you'll see that a sort of unexpected path has been a really wonderful set of background experiences, really, to bring somebody into the Weather Service at this level. And so I am just delighted tonight to bring in Dr. Owen Shea. Really quickly, before I open the floor to you, Owen, to introduce yourself, I want to note a couple things. First, it was noted that you are very highly organized. I can say, as his former office mate, I was his office mate in graduate school. He is extremely organized. You guys have absolutely no idea. He has gone on to, he like makes custom bookshelves to display everything appropriately, proper. Like, it is incredible. We're not going to delve into this, but the man also, those plants behind him, he grows plants. He had a little forest of Venus flytraps when we were in grad school. So he's also this like very talented person. Anything that he grows flourishes. Anything this man touches, he has a green thumb. He's also an accomplished musician, and all these things. He is someone I don't just say this jokingly. He's like this contender up against Dr. Neil Jacobs for most interesting man in the world. So we know and we love Dr. Jacobs. Owen's giving him a run for his money. Dr. Owen Shea, welcome to the show. We're delighted to have you on WeatherBrains.
Thank you so much, Kim. And that is quite an intro. No. I can't debate
Good luck
any of
living up to
now.
that.
Yeah.
Right? Won't be able to live up to it, but she was right about the Venus flytraps. That's my one strange hobby, is growing carnivorous plants.
Yep, it's pretty awesome. Well, hey, let's tee up the embarrassing friend stories aside. Let's tee up what brought you into that space to begin with. Tell us your origin story. What brought you into meteorology and got you, into the programs that you ended up pursuing?
Sure. So before we dive in, just wanted to say that so next week we'll be giving the more formal WPC deep dive. And so for tonight's show, I'm speaking purely in a personal capacity, which is why I'm purposefully not wearing the NWS shirt. So I am just speaking as Owen Shea this evening, since we'll be going through all sorts of topics, starting with a life journey. So I was born and raised in Florida. Hometown is Melbourne, Florida on the East Coast. And I was only about a stone's throw from the National Weather Service office in Melbourne, Florida. And so I got interested in weather at a very young age. I was a fourth grader when I decided I wanted to be a meteorologist. And that was thanks to experiences as a child where I remembered my parents building a fence and preparing ahead of Hurricane Andrew, and wondering whether or not building a fence was a great idea at the time. Thankfully, Andrew did not hit Central Florida. But 2 years later, we experienced a tropical storm Gordon, that I vividly remember. It crossed the peninsula, kind of did this weird figure eight around just off the coast of Virginia, came back down into Florida. And my dad was actually on a business trip to DC. And I remember vividly before he left, I asked him what channel the Weather Channel was on. And it was channel 27 in my local cable box. And I would just watch that throughout that whole storm. And I remember I was just fascinated by the swirling patterns on a weather radar. I tracked the storm. I plotted the latitude, longitude coordinates. And I learned from my mom many years later that apparently, as an even younger child, I was just fascinated by whirlpools in a bathtub. I would as a toddler, I would apparently bring a stool up to the washing machine, shove a pen in the safety lock just to watch the spin cycle. And so I had this strange fascination with spinning things, tops, pulleys, you name it. And so when I laid eyes upon a spinning radar image, apparently that was it. I decided that would be my career. And so I decided in fourth grade that's what I wanted to do. And then in high school, I had the opportunity to intern at the National Weather Service office with Tony Cristaldi was my mentor. Some of you may know the name. And I also visited the National Hurricane Center. I interviewed Max Mayfield as part of a high school project. And then even before him, I remember going to a Bob Sheets talk at Florida Tech that he gave. And so my interest goes way back. And I never particularly imagined where my life path would take me. And so that's the numerous chapters of the story that'll follow. But ultimately, I wanted to experience something other than Florida. And so when I was picking which school I wanted to go to major in meteorology, I ended up going to Cornell University in upstate New York. Never experienced lake effect snow in my life growing up in Florida. And so that's where I started my academic journey.
So what brought you to from Cornell to the University of Oklahoma, where we met? And what were you working on there?
So I had the fortune of being part of the original Noah Hollings scholarship class. And so in the summer of 2006, when we were selecting where we wanted to go for an internship, I just picked something completely out of the blue, a place that I never thought I would live. And I picked National Severe Storms Laboratory. So NSSL. I was like, Oklahoma, the place of tornadoes. I had this vision of seeing Twister, right? And I had this vision of tornadoes just dropping out of the sky everywhere. Why not live in the Wild West for a summer and see what it's all about? So I did my internship there, ended up being fascinated with not only the weather, but also the culture, and just learning and working with so many people from all walks of life with a strange fascination for weather and lots of technological toys at OU. I basically was like, you know what? I'm going to do grad school here. So after graduating from Cornell, packed up the car, drove from Ithaca, New York to Norman, Oklahoma. It could not have been a more dramatic change in scenery, in geopolitics, and whatever, and everything. And so it was a very fascinating transition. But yeah, that's where I ended up.
Yeah, and while you were there, okay, so you had that tropical interest in background growing up. Tell us about the work you were doing at the university while you were in a severe weather centered place. You still kept that tropical piece in there, right?
Yes. So I picked a project. I wanted to learn about tornado dynamics ultimately, because as a good student of OU, who doesn't? But then I also kept that interest in tropical meteorology. So I ended up working on a project related to understanding the dynamics of, or looking into the dynamics of supercells embedded in landfalling tropical cyclones. And so that was the project that I work on. But then while I was there, 2007 to 2010, I also got roped into the Vortex 2 project. So I was able to serve as one of the navigators for the mobile Mesonet team. And so I worked with Paul Markowski's team at Penn State, as well as some of the NSSL folks. Roamed the plains, learned how to intercept tornadoes, had several close calls that were rather dramatic, involving busted windshields and things like that. But I learned so much about mesoscale meteorology while I was out there, even though I was still working on a project that had kept my feet in the tropics.
Sorry, my mute button is apparently sticky tonight. Sorry for the very dramatic pauses
Oh, no
before I jump
problem.
in. Oh my word. So let's talk about from OU, you ended up going next to a further west location. You kept going. So you ended up in Hawaii, following that path at first of tropical meteorology, but a lot of really interesting opportunities availed themselves once you got to Hawaii. So tell us about what were you intending to do there? And then when did your path become something different?
Great question. So that transition was one I did not expect. I did not foresee ever living in Hawaii, and yet that's where my life took me. So I had actually applied to the University of Hawaii as one of my graduate school options, and I did get accepted initially, but I turned it down to go to OU. And so I had always had in the back of my head this desire to learn more about the tropics, aside from what I had learned as a child growing up in Florida, kind of on my own. Um, but because I also grew up in Florida, I kind of had that been there, done that attitude toward the Florida schools. No offense. A lot of great programs there, but I basically wanted to experience something different, a different perspective in the tropics. And I didn't know at the time that there are two very different schools of thought regarding tropical meteorology. One is very Pacific centric, and one is very Atlantic centric. And that academic family tree is itself quite fascinating. So I got to see both sides. And so when I went to the University of Hawaii, I went out there on an NSF fellowship. So I was on the graduate research fellowship, which meant I was free labor for the university. So the transition was rather simple. I basically spoke with them. The application was kind of a formality at that point, especially since I had been accepted for my master's initially. And so now it's like, hey, actually, would you still take me for a PhD? And so my transition was rather simple, academically at least. But then I went out there and realized that the perspective shift is incredible. At OU, we looked at county maps, half of a state. We looked at mesoscale structure. We go out there, everything was global scale. All the professors, all the researchers, they're looking at climate variability, teleconnections, EOFs, empirical orthogonal functions are like just bread and butter for every analysis. And I remember thinking I was just totally lost. I was like, do I really know anything about meteorology? Um, and a state was but a blip. It was like a pixel on the map, right? And so what I thought was interesting weather, my advisor thought was noise. It was just noise that could be like smoothed out, right? Things like high vorticity for me is fascinating, but in the grand scheme of teleconnections, it's actually just a blip in the signal. And so I learned that perspective. And after about 2 years, I passed my comprehensive exam, did the hardest part of the PhD, basically all the oral exams and equations and things like that. Something came out of came out of left field, just out of the blue. I was not expecting it, but one of my 5 committee members, Dr. Carl Kim, was the director of the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, which is a FEMA-funded training center that develops emergency management training courses for state and local emergency managers and responders. And I picked him to be on my committee because I knew he had that tie-in to emergency managers, and also he was an urban and regional planning professor. After I had passed the exam, he pulled me aside to his office, and he basically was like, I don't want to distract you from your academics, and you definitely need to finish your PhD, but I've been looking for years for somebody to help develop training courses for emergency managers that can bring weather and messaging and products and services down to the first responder level. And I need somebody who has had hands in multiple pots across the country and different types of hazards. And I could tell he was trying to invite me to contribute. And so, of course, my default answer was sure, but how much time would it take? And he was like, well, we could start with halftime, but ultimately I'd like to grow this. And that was when I was like, yeah, I'd love to help, but I don't think I have time for this. And then he looks at me and he was like, this is a job offer. For the first time in my life, I was surprised by basically what was a job offer, because as a graduate student, I was so used to giving free labor, just doing projects for free, that I wasn't expecting that this offer would come this way. But he was like, yeah, I will pay you. And we can start on a part-time basis if you want, and see where that goes. And so that's what I did. I ended up falling in love with the training process and developing these training courses. And part of the funding, it was, I think, about $5 million per year of funding. It was effectively like a cooperative institute between FEMA and the University of Hawaii. That's how it operated. And we had the funding specifically to develop and deploy these training courses at the awareness or performance levels out to the field, where we would actually give a training course at some local firehouse in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or Casper, Wyoming, or some of the most rural locations where it's hard for the first responders and emergency managers to get training. And so this entire program was intended to serve state and local communities. Federal employees weren't even allowed to be instructors, to be paid. Everything was directed at state and locals. Federal employees weren't even the intended audience, right? But obviously we wanted to keep the National Weather Service in the loop. And so part of what I did was, in writing and developing these training courses and also certifying our instructors, I also wanted to get the buy-in of the National Weather Service, because in my eyes, for any sort of weather training program to stick, it had to have the buy-in of warning coordination meteorologists and the institution that's in charge of forecasting, right? And so I personally flew to every regional headquarters of the National Weather Service and briefed them on what we were doing. I just went into the lion's den and basically was like, hey, I'm giving training. I'm developing a team of instructors. And what I had expected was it would be challenged as like sort of a defensive, like turf war kind of a thing, where, you know, understandably they wouldn't want some outsider contractor FEMA person to develop training, and I would agree with them, right? And so I came at it from the perspective of, hey, there's this pool of funding to basically build training for a community that doesn't have regular access to trainings. It may even be a 4-hour drive for them to get to a local spotter course, and nobody would have time to do that. So because we have this funding to actually deploy these courses, including printing all the handouts and tracking all the survey results and the main takeaways over the long term, why not? Let's leverage this infrastructure. And so I invited the Weather Service to participate. Basically, I made it a policy that any contracted instructor that deploy these courses must reach out to the local warning coordination meteorologist in that CWA and to actually invite their participation. And if they can't attend, share the course material with them, right? So that way, keep them in the loop, basically, right? And then what ended up happening was, not only did the Weather Service support that effort, a lot of retired forecasters ended up becoming instructors for the program, and it's still continuing. I found out that all of these training courses. I developed a tornado awareness training course, a winter weather awareness course. I still remember, I vividly remember packing a room with Joe Schaefer, Dave Imey, a lot of the folks from SPC who became instructors um, after they had retired. I think Dave was an instructor for quite a while. Um, and basically got their buy-in and support. So now we have these courses still going, funded by FEMA, but essentially supplement the work of what NWS has already been doing. So anyway, I did that for 4 years, and I fell in love with the outreach, the idea of bringing weather and demystifying it to the people on the ground who truly matter. And some really interesting, heartfelt stories involve just hearing the stories of the locals, like a 92-year-old woman in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, who survived the tornado from the early 1900s as a child. Like I was able to hear those stories and just meet the people. And she was sitting directly next to the fire chief doing a Joplin, Missouri tornado activity that I had cooked up for the course, right? And it was just so fascinating to hear their stories and to see the emergence of knowledge sharing. That was the 4 years that I spent initially in Hawaii was for that.
So tell us a little bit about why was such a program needed? For those who aren't aware, what is the baseline understanding of weather and emergency management? Is this something that to become an emergency manager, surely there's some background certification process or training? I mean, tell us about what that looks like and why were you up to what you were up to?
Yeah, surprisingly, and I think part of the challenge is the emergency management community is very, very decentralized. There is no hierarchy where you start with FEMA and then go down to regions and then local offices. It's the exact opposite, right? Everything is ground up. If your local jurisdiction is overwhelmed, then the local jurisdiction asks the state for help, and if the state is overwhelmed, the state asks the feds. Um, until that reverse hierarchy happens, you really don't have any sort of national standardization process. And so, part of why I wanted to develop this training program and why it was needed was to level the playing field, to provide a common vocabulary for emergency managers and first responders to actually have a base level knowledge of all these different hazards. That did not exist prior to this program. And the Skyborne Spotter program at the time was also very decentralized because it would depend on the location. And that's necessary because all hazards, all disasters are local. But there was no standardization process. And so that's why this became necessary.
Hey, Owen, it's great to see you. Great to chat with you.
Great to
I
see
just
you.
wanted to talk about what you were just talking about. I think it was a brilliant and very smart move to get the Weather Service on board and to try to get the WFOs on board. I'll admit I was one of those people at the very beginning where I was like, hey, we're doing the training. These are our people, and who are these people coming in to do training on the side? But soon found out that it was excellent training, excellent instructors. I seem to recall something in Norman where a group came, maybe in the early days of even developing some of the course material, and we got to kind of sit in on a sample class and provide some input. I don't know exactly when it was or what it was, but I just wanted to say thank you for doing that. And that did set a really solid foundation for the training. And I'm glad to hear it's still going on.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. Yeah, we tagged up with the Weather Ready Nation symposium, one of which was hosted in Norman. So between that and some of the pilot courses, yes. Thank you so much for your involvement.
That's it. I was trying to remember what it was, Rick, because I was there for that too. And that's right. That's what it was. It was neat to see that material early on. And yeah, Rick, it was an interesting political moment for you to do that, Owen, in part because Weather Ready Nation had just spun up in the previous couple of years. And there was that push toward, okay, IDSS is now where we want to go. So it was quite a moment. The fact that you did that and had such success, I think is a testament to the fact that you're a real bridge builder. And it wasn't about anyone's ego. It was about getting the job done. As part of that, something that also really impressed me about what you did and how you did it was, as you say, going everywhere. And this is where I want to take a very brief comedic turn, if that's okay, because on this
Sure.
show recently, we have had some fun stories shared about flying experiences. And do you even remember how much you flew to get all of that done? And tell, if you can, if you care to share too, tell us one or two of your funny stories of survival in flying, because you had some really entertaining experiences. You can omit the names of
Yes.
the airlines if you wish. We don't always here, but you can.
There
John
was
Morgan, we all know how much you love Aer Lingus. We're just we're a
yes.
walking billboard for it at this point.
Mhm.
There was one year where I spent 150, I think, something days in a hotel room. And I hit Premier 1K on United by the month of March of that year.
Wow.
And I remember, so some of the crazy stories. There was, when I was approaching insanity during, I remember this 3 week period where I did like 5 trips. And so by like the fourth or fifth trip, I was checking in at the airport at Honolulu International. And it was the same person at the counter, and they actually recognized me. It's one thing to be recognized at your favorite restaurant, right? But it's a whole other thing to be recognized at an airport. And that was when I realized, all right, I'm in over my head. What am I doing? But yeah, numerous things. One of my coworkers now at WPC, Brian Jackson, he was working at Sterling office at the time. But I flew a flight into DCA where the flight had to be aborted because a hook echo was about to cross the landing path. And I remember seeing the Pentagon disappear into a rain shaft. And I was like, well, that's it. I guess I'm disappearing too.
Yeah.
And then we aborted the landing and we diverted to Dulles. And then from there, because the weather was so bad, they didn't want to put everyone in a bus either. We just sat there for a few hours and then loaded the plane again and flew from Dulles to DCA. So that is now the shortest flight I've ever been on, including the inter-island flights in Hawaii. So Dulles to DCA was like 12 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah,
You
a lot of stories.
Real flying from Hawaii to the mainland is itself not a short flight. Like that was a
No.
lot. 5 hours at least,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
5?
Right. It was.
Yeah.
I got used to California being the halfway point, and then there's yet another cross country flight basically from that point. I don't miss those days.
Yeah. Well, I think just hats off to you for the dedication to seeding those programs across the country. And then you do have now a whole lot of instructors across the country who are taking on a lot of that. And I love hearing that that's still going. That is a really worthwhile endeavor. And okay, so let's transition to the next set of things that you got the chance to do in Hawaii. So the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center was a nice foothold into more of the DoD, more of the defense, Homeland Security side of meteorological applications. Weather forecasts really useful for a whole lot of folks. Tell us a little bit about the transition then to working with JTWC, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center.
Yeah. So that was another thing I didn't foresee. I remember as a kid when I was in Florida, just marveling at satellite images. I remember looking at the old GMS-5 satellite of the Western Pacific and looking at the big storms out there. And I had known about the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, but I never thought I would work there someday. Well, when I knew I was moving to Hawaii, part of my interest grew in the world of, that's basically the NHC of the Pacific. So is there any way I could potentially do a research project that included them? And so I was able to do an internship there. It was an unpaid internship. And that was before I even did my FEMA work. And so after 4 years of that, essentially what JTWC wanted to do was to civilianize what was normally the military training officer position. And so their technical advisor for generation before that was Ed Fukada. And then after he had retired, essentially, that billet was converted to a civilian one for the training officer billet. And so they wanted someone who was familiar with their operations and also did typhoon research. And so because I had done that unpaid internship 4 years prior, that was my foot in the door. And so it was still a very competitive process. but I ended up getting the offer, and I ended up staying there for 8 years. So for almost the rest of my time in Hawaii, I was doing training at the Joint Typhoon Warning Center in a role that would be similar to like a hybrid SU and WCM position at a National Weather Service office, at like a national center, right? And so I became really passionate about understanding the operations as well as doing some internal outreach in terms of to other military commands that needed to understand the tropics, and then also training our own forecasters on the technical operational side. So that's what I did for about 8 years.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Joint Typhoon Warning Center? What is the jurisdiction? How does it work? And what is the basis for the difference, like the distinction between the philosophies of the Pacific and the Atlantic? Well, you mentioned that earlier. Tell us a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, the JTWC is one of the oldest tropical cyclone forecast agencies in the world. It traces its origin story all the way back to Admiral Nimitz during World War II. And that's something a lot of people don't know. But Admiral Nimitz actually, after the Admiral Halsey incidents, so those of you book lovers, I know there's several of you here on this call right now, Halsey's Typhoon, as well as an even better version of the story, it's called Sea Cobra. Those are two books that were written about an incident in World War II where the Third Fleet was accidentally sailed into Typhoon Cobra. And we lost over 900 sailors at sea, many of whom died due to dehydration and shark attacks. So think like USS Indianapolis disaster, like that scale of event. To date, it is the most devastating natural disaster that the U.S. Navy has ever experienced. This was during the Douglas MacArthur raids in the Philippines. Admiral Halsey was supporting from the sea to the east of the Philippines the operations that were going on over land while this typhoon happened. So basically, one of the very first radar images ever taken from inside a storm was actually at sea in the middle of this typhoon. And they actually observed on-station winds of over 120 knots, which you should just never experience at sea. So several destroyers capsized. The aircraft carriers listed so sharply that the aircraft actually fell into the ocean. Like it's an epic disaster. I'm actually surprised there hasn't been a movie made about this yet, but it was quite a scene. That prompted Admiral Nimitz to basically throw all sorts of resources at the typhoon problem. And he actually wrote a classified cable at the time, it's been declassified since then, that actually said tropical disturbances and the formation and movement of typhoons must be treated as like an adversary of war, and that it can do greater damage to us as a country than the enemy that we're fighting. Right. So even before the National Hurricane Center was founded, this dialogue was happening. Right. And so fast forward to 1959, the Fleet Weather Central in Guam formally became the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. And it was based in Guam for many decades after that, as a collaboration between the Navy and the Air Force. In 1999, they actually moved to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, because in the decades leading up to that, Guam was this distant outpost. And so the military forecasters were considered deployed. And so they would do rotational deployments, which for a tropical season meant you might get one season under your belt, right? So as soon as you get good at your job, you're leaving, which doesn't work when it comes to building forecaster expertise, right? So by bringing it back to Hawaii, they could do full-blown 3-year tours, which isn't that much better in comparison to like a civilian organization, right? But at least it was better for continuity. But you can imagine for a military organization, forecasting is a big challenge because after 3 years, you might be truly getting good at your job, and that's when you leave, right? And so you needed a handful of civilian experts to truly ground the entire training program of a military command, and that was the role that I played. And so even though the organization itself was about 40 to 50 people, wasn't huge. half the size of WPC, for example. But the turnover was enormous, right, relative to a civilian organization. And so because of that, it was this constant grind of trainings, ensuring everyone could forecast properly, to include oral exams, written exams. It was a full-blown curriculum that we were having to run there on an annual basis.
So, Owen,
Yes.
this is a strange question. So, in the Pacific, we have super typhoons, and there's
Yes.
been six super typhoons with pressures in the 870s, which no one in the Atlantic knows that. Why do you think the Atlantic should do super hurricanes or something to get people to safety that might just be from the Kim side of things to get people who are obsessed with categories when you take the effect of surge, wind, flood, what all the hazards? Do you think there's something we should be doing in the future? And I guess I should ask you, does super typhoon do anything in the Pacific, or do people just go, oh, it's a super typhoon?
Yeah. Great question. It doesn't do very much messaging wise for the Pacific. Um, in fact, there's the origin of that term is actually lost in lore. I talked to Chip Guard, the old WCM of Guam, and then previous director of Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and he's got a memory way back to the founding of JTWC or shortly thereafter. And according to him, uh, the term super typhoon was just a casual term that was thrown out and proposed in a casual setting, like at a bar or something, because a particular storm just looked super. And the director at the time basically was like, this is a super typhoon. And apparently that stuck. I haven't been able to independently verify this story. I would like to, but because of that rumor, I really don't know how scientifically valid that term is. Not to mention the fact that in the Pacific, you have all of these different warning systems, and meteorology becomes this geopolitical competition game almost between countries that don't particularly like each other, and so they actually defend their weather forecast as a source of pride. And so, for one particular storm that may form west of Hawaii and just continue across the Pacific, the UN WMO name that's given to a storm, say, for example, Super Typhoon Haiyan, the Philippines decide they want to give their own name. So that's why you see the name Yolanda also cited for the same storm, right? They don't want to follow the Japanese given storm. That's a Chinese word, right? And so for one single storm that goes through all these different jurisdictions, it'll get a forecast from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, from the Philippine Agency, from Taiwan, from mainland China, and from Korea and Japan, right? All of those independent forecasts, not collaborated whatsoever, some of which use different names. And so you can see why. So to answer Kim's earlier question, the jurisdiction, right? JTWC exists because of the US presence across the world. We need a standardized language, right? And so that's why the entire Eastern Hemisphere is covered by Joint Typhoon Warning Center's responsibility, to try to at least put some semblance of standardization to the madness. So in terms of the Atlantic names, I don't think adding another category would necessarily do that much, although we are seeing that some of these intensities are creeping up, right? And Hurricane Melissa, there was a moment right before landfall in Jamaica where I saw the satellite structure in the infrared satellite imagery with cloud tops less than 80 degrees Celsius, negative 80 degrees Celsius, was something that rivaled Super Typhoon Haiyan of 2013. And I've seen side-by-side comparisons, and I never thought that I would see a storm that even approached that in the Atlantic, right? But here we are. From a messaging perspective, I don't think an additional category would necessarily spur action, because the threshold for action is long gone by the time you get up to those intensities, right? So if anything, the onset of your 34 or 50 knot wind is where that should matter. and trying to drive that decision point down to greater accuracy is more important than what the peak intensities might be. So I think just adding another category would be like everyone screaming a little louder. The noise in the room doesn't necessarily mean you're going to hear something more clearly.
Got to tell you, Owen, having spent a little time before he retired from the WFO at Guam with Chip Guard, if Chip told me something, I would believe it. There's a book back here that Chip signed and gave to me, one of his books on the typhoons of the Western Pacific. Brandon and Landon, of course, we've had them here on the show from Guam, and they're both good friends as well. And that office is amazing too. I was really listening closely what you're saying, Owen, and it is really interesting to spend time in that Guam office because they're 15 hours ahead of anywhere in the United States.
Right.
And so they're out there and they do some amazing work. That office is just amazing. I love the people out there and everything else. And I spent time with Chip and the people out there in the office. They're really, really amazing. And personally, Owen, I love that story. I hope the super typhoon did come up from a bar somewhere. I just think that I like that.
Yeah, working with Brandon and Landon. I've known both of them for many years as well, and it's just the twin brothers of the Guam office are legendary.
Oh yeah,
easily confused because one's a WCM and one's a Sioux, and they're identical twins.
Yep,
so.
Yep.
So adorable. So Owen, what you just described sounds like it could be a bit of a thorny mess. Okay, so you were trying to be the WCM and the Sioux for this enormous, the Eastern Hemisphere. Does that involve coordination with all of these different nations who may or may not have a difference in opinion or philosophy for just communicating risk to their populations? Like the forecasts differ, and you had a front row seat to that, and why? And just what did that look like trying to communicate with your own stakeholders and even these other nations? And what was all in that soup for you in like a WCM kind of role?
Well, lucky for me, I like soup, and so there's definitely a lot to throw in this this large stew, and so I found it utterly fascinating and intriguing, and that's what kept me going there for so long. Was there was this like kaleidoscope of challenges. And so on paper, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center only serves the Department of Defense, US government interests, right? You see that disclaimer on everything. Problem is, all weather, even in the military, if it's just weather information, is unclassified and open to the public, right? That's a US public domain policy. And so all of that information is available. And plus, National Weather Service uses JTWC forecast as the official source west of the international dateline. So all of that required that there was a level of officiality to it. However, because it is the oldest tropical cyclone warning agency in the entire Asia Pacific, it predates most of the other countries' own forecast services. And so because of that, JTWC was looked upon with admiration and respect, even by countries that are more adversarial in nature, perhaps. And so that added a whole layer of geopolitical fun during the UN Typhoon Committee meetings, where you could see everyone kind of angling against each other or with each other, depending on their friendliness or non-friendliness. Meanwhile, JTWC attended as an unofficial spectator of the UN because as a military organization, the official US vote was the National Weather Service. And the Joint Typhoon Warning Center was just there to support. But JTWC would often get the keynote role as like the scene setter for everybody there. So I've had the fortune of being able to address the committee and everyone sitting in front of their little flags. And that part was cool. But I was an unofficial voice, right? The official US delegation was headed by Pacific Region and National Weather Service.
Oh,
but having some of those conversations were just utterly fascinating because you could see that even in like the nerdiest of debates about satellites and like data flow, you could see like China talking over Korea a little bit, and then Japan would like want to have none of it, and then But because they're like the big brother designated by the UN, they're the official word. But then JTWC was respected by them because a lot of the forecast skill they kind of like looked up to. And so, like for example, even just a few years ago, um, JMA, Japan Meteorological Agency, just started um, uh, intensity forecast out to 120 hours. Previously, it was only just out to 3 days, but JTWC had been doing it for years, out to 5 days, right? So the little things like that would be points of collaboration. So I would even put on my international diplomacy hat, and part of my outreach was every year I would not be in a polo shirt, and I would actually put on a suit and tie and go to Tokyo and actually meet with the director general of the JMA. And he would typically host us for like a lunch, and we would follow all of the international gift rules. Like the lunch had to be less than $25, or else we had to report it, stuff like that. And it would be a meet and greet. I would thank them for giving the United States Himawari data for free. And then they would share some of their technical knowledge, and we would give them basically an update on all of our operations as well as our research developments, right? And so we would do like a nice 4-hour half-day seminar exchange with their scientists. And I would do that in addition to visiting all of the U.S. Navy and Air Force bases in the area and giving them more operational training.
So hearing all of this just gives me so much confidence that handling inter-weather service disputes between three WFOs about whether the excessive rainfall outlook should be slight or moderate, you're going to be able to knock that out of the park with no problem. So thank goodness we have you in that position. That's amazing to hear those stories.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yes, I hadn't drawn those lines in my head, but yeah, that makes sense. It's been good practice, I suppose, right? And then yeah,
Would never have inter-weather service disputes. What?
This is a theoretical.
Yes.
Just imagine if it were
Alleged.
to happen.
It's very alleged.
Alleged.
One thing I have to tell y'all though, this is great discussion that we're having here, because I had a discussion probably in the last couple of years. You're going to smile now, on you will, and Kim will. I asked someone at the National Hurricane Center, why don't we have this great Central Pacific, Eastern Pacific, and all the Atlantic there on the National Hurricane Center page. Why don't we expand to the Western Pacific? Take what the military have given us, expand that map over, so on one map you could go over there. And I was told, you probably don't want to get involved in that, and don't bring that up again. I mean, it was very obvious that was military out there, or the Joint Center, and everything else was the National Hurricane Center, whether it be in Honolulu or whether it be in Miami. But I did ask that question. Someone said, nope, not going to happen. Move on.
We did have to collaborate with the Hurricane Center routinely in the Eastern Pacific, because there's actually a little bit of overlap. So even though the JTWC did not forecast for that region, they were still the source of the forecast information for the DoD. So in other words, the JTWC had to repackage NHC and CPHC data and forecasts into their format and send it out.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine how there are occasional either differences in opinion, or in the case of actual product differences, the Tropical Cyclone Formation Alert, the TCFA, it's actually a DoD instruction required product. That's a 24-hour heads up before advisories are initiated.
Yep.
And so it was this constant game of trying to forecast the NHC forecaster, because 24 hours before they initiate the advisory, the TCFA had to be issued. And so we would routinely call NHC and basically be like, hey, do you think you're about a day out? And usually it was not a very productive conversation, because we're essentially asking them to forecast themselves, which wasn't particularly helpful. But we needed to, because there was that difference in product, right? And so we basically came up with a rule of thumb over the years, which was about 60 to 70% probability of formation would equate to a 24-hour formation. So we ran all the stats on it just to try to automate this somehow.
Well, one thing too that I find very interesting, and I think we've discussed a little bit on WeatherBrains when we had Brandon and Landon on, is it is entirely a different public perception about weather forecast and everything in Guam than it is with any WFO here in the United States. It's a completely different thing, and it's been sort of one of those things that's been a hurdle for the WFO Guam to handle to some degree. It's not the same thing. They're out there by themselves largely, except for the WSOs that they have some. They're over out in the Western Pacific. But to me, it's fascinating, Owen, what they have to kind of deal with out there. And it is a whole different type of mentality in a way.
Yeah, it is. It's a whole different decision support challenge.
Yeah.
The concept of outreach is different, right? And it's a different world, but it's a perspective that I really value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting from the emergency management standpoint that in Guam, Brandon, Landon, and everybody else, they deal with civil defense. It's still civil defense agency out there. They still use that term on the island. Yeah. And so it's interesting to me.
Yeah, part of my outreach was so here's another fun dimensional challenge. So when I came to emergency managers in the Western Pacific,
yeah,
depending on which country they're working for, they had to listen to that country's forecast, right? But because they're our host nation, meaning for a military base that's in Japan is hosting them. So the Japanese emergency managers are listening to Japan's forecast, but the U.S. military has to listen to the U.S. forecast. That was a fun soup.
Yep.
And then not only that, but you look at a place like Korea, where we're still technically at war with North Korea. And so the South Korean command structure is combined with the American one under the United Nations command. They fly the United Nations flag as part of the war effort. Now, all of a sudden, you've got Korean military. Who do they listen to? That became an interesting one because they had a KMA forecast, right? But then JTWC is obviously supporting the U.S. troops. But under a combined force, JTWC's forecast was what drove a lot of the basically their equivalent of watch warning, which would be like the TCOR, the tropical cyclone conditions of readiness. Yep. So yeah, it was this constant. It was quite a mess.
we think we have coordination or consistency issues, in the mainland, but that really trumps a lot of our concerns. But I have to ask. So Owen, going through your story, bringing all of this to some of the next steps of what you did, you'd started out in Hawaii as a meteorology PhD student. You've then transitioned into these training positions and more like federal defense oriented forecasting roles. What did that do for your academic interest? I feel like there was a transition that happened. You're really interested in geopolitics, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't want to admit it for many years. 2017 was when I finally sat down and became honest with myself over, is a PhD in meteorology truly my calling? I had done all the work, most of the work for it. I was essentially ABD, mostly just research left. I did all the coursework, all the beating myself against the head with equations. And I even sat my two bosses at my commander and XO, executive officer, at the Joint Typhoon Warning Center down in my office. And I was like, all right, I'm seeking mentorship here. Am I crazy for thinking I might want to switch topics, like departments entirely, halfway through my PhD? Nobody does this. But I've also taken Econ 101, which talks about sunk cost, right? And so I'm like, okay, maybe I just cut my losses, and it's about my future that should be what I carry into this decision. And it was a conversation with my parents, actually. I remember I was talking to them about exactly what my calling is, and I kind of became I became more aware of the fact that, a lot of the things that I had done, either publications or outreach efforts or just white papers that I had written, were all on things that were not physics. um, that's not to say that I didn't like it. I still appreciated all of that. I still enjoyed the process of deriving an equation. Um, but for me, the bigger challenge was the messy, fuzzy social side. And I began to see, and Hurricane Sandy was actually a big factor in my decision, by the way. Hurricane Sandy helped illustrate to me that our forecasts keep getting incrementally better, but our response and actions are not necessarily. And so when it comes to saving lives, improving, enhancing the economy, these goals aren't just physical goals, right? That's just one part of the equation. And so after lots of soul searching, I basically took my sunk cost, I accepted it, and was like, you know what? I'm going to do a PhD in political science. And not traditional political science where I'm like studying voting and statistics and stuff like that, but more like science and technology studies and the politics behind decision making and institutions, and what is it about the process of forecasting that we're not even considering that we probably should be. And I met an amazing PhD advisor by the name of Jairus Grove. He's an international relations professor, but also science and technology scholar out at the University of Hawaii. He was the head of the Future Studies program, which itself was like mind blowing to me. I didn't even know that was like a program that could be had. But he basically was studying like the intersections of science and technology and decision making in different future scenarios. And obviously, weather was like a topic that fascinated him, but he didn't have a meteorologist who decided to show up as one of his grad students before. And so when I came to him, it was this immediate match in terms of intellectual interest. And he randomly pulled something out of the hat that sold me. And he basically was like, a lot of physical problems are easier to simulate once they've happened, and you're just trying to figure out its movement from point A to point B. It's the starting of that point A that's difficult. And so he gave me this off the cuff talk about convective initiation and how challenging that would be without even knowing what that is, right? He basically brought that to my attention from a philosophical perspective. And then he talked about how like such and such French philosopher in the 1800s knew back then that like migration patterns of animals are easier to simulate than the change in the actual population. So track versus intensity, which one's harder to simulate, right? And so I immediately found that parallel in the tropical cyclone world. And so with these conversations, I was like, okay, my mind is getting blown and I'm here for it. So I basically was like, all right, I'm just going to take whatever classes I need to, bare minimum, but then also work on this dissertation where I'm deep diving into these interdisciplinary ideas. And so one of the chapters of my dissertation that I ended up writing was critiquing philosophically the tropical cyclone intensity process. And what I found was that a lot of our challenges have come from the fact that our definition of what intensity is more historical than it is physical. If you think about the official definition, it is the maximum sustained winds at 10 meters above the ocean surface. That is the official definition of intensity for a tropical cyclone. All right, take that and then dissect it. What do we mean by maximum? Is it a wind gust? Is it an average across a chunk of the vortex? Is it characteristic of the storm itself? I remember vividly halfway through doing this research, I had this long email thread with Chris Lancy at the National Hurricane Center, just debating this, right? Because at Joint Typhoon Warning Center, where there is no aircraft reconnaissance, all the intensity assessments were based off of satellite, which necessarily meant that you're looking at an area, right? So imagine a forecaster trying to assign a value to an intensity. based off of a picture. You're necessarily having to mentally figure out, what do we mean by maximum? Are you talking about this chunk? If you have a single wind barb that's 70 knots, does that mean the storm is 70 if the rest of it is 50? Or do you want to look at the characteristic, like what would be best representative of that vortex, right? And that's subjective. NHC's perspective, I remember having this discussion with Chris Lancy. For them, because aircraft reconnaissance is such a primary driver of the analysis, it's by definition a point value. And so when you get a maximum sustained wind, that's clearly a maximum in that point data, you can't just discount it. You also can't just think about, is that representative or not? It's just, it was actually observed. So therefore it is maximum, right? So a lot of the maximum sustained winds are from the actual aircraft recon data. So look how not only the definition, but also the mode of data sampling has now also affected the actual data set. And then you throw another layer onto it, synthetic aperture radar. The SAR advancements have been amazing. They're extremely high resolution to the point where every little filament of wind gust can be picked up in a typhoon now. Just not in a regular time interval. So you might get one every other day or something like that. But when you do get that snapshot, it's so high resolution that you pick up every wind gust. So now you have the opposite problem. Which wind gust do you pick for your maximum value, right? It's so high resolution that there's actually a method to downscale that data and purposely make it like less resolved in order to come up with a number. And so anyway, I basically explore all of these different factors to include the mode of the mode of data collection, how you defined intensity. And I basically was like, you know what, maybe it isn't the computer models failing to simulate the physics of intensification. That's probably part of it, but another part that we can't discount is the fact that we're trying to force computer models to dumb down what's truly a four-dimensional vortex with time into a single number that quite honestly is a bit arbitrary if you think about it in the grand scheme of nature. That we're just assigning a single number to the intensity, right? And all of those layers of subjectivity are just kind of assumed away. And what I realized was drawing on a lot of literature from like French philosophers and like thinkers that are completely unrelated to meteorology. One parallel that I discovered was that Henri Bergson, one of the French philosophers who talked about intensive versus extensive properties, I realized that our concept of intensity in meteorology is an intensive property, meaning that it is something that is real, it has agency, it can act, but it also it isn't able to be truly measured. It doesn't take up space, right? And so an extensive property would be like a dimension. How large is something, right? And that's easy to measure. And so what I realized in this research was that things in other fields, other scientific fields like medicine, have similar problems. For decades, medical researchers try to figure out how to quantify pain. What is the cause of pain? What is the ultimate particle or signal that causes pain? And then how do you rank it? Well, after decades of failure, what do they do now? They basically were like, you know what? Rank it 1 to 10 based on your experience. And it's not a failure of the science, right? It's not just throwing your hands up in the air. It's actually saying, no, how you feel pain is an intensive property and it's real, even if you can't measure it, right? And so in a way, I find an analogy to this in the tropical cyclone intensity world. Our impact of the storm on civilization, right, is an intensive property. Our attempt at trying to quantify that into a value that we call intensity is our scientific attempt at trying to metricize, at trying to measure something that is inherently unmeasurable. And without considering a lot of these layers of philosophy and honestly politics behind it, we're kind of just dancing around the challenge a little bit, right? I don't necessarily have like a solution to present right away here, but the dissertation that I ended up writing was basically just shining a light on this. That in order to solve a lot of these what we thought were traditionally scientific problems, we actually need to take an interdisciplinary approach. Imagine some sort of committee or a research team that actually had a science and technology scholar on there, or someone with more background in some of these philosophical thinkings, or could look across different scientific fields that may be dealing with similar challenges. Like imagine how much faster we would progress in that iterative process of research, right? So that's ultimately what got me excited. And so even though yes, my degree ultimately is PhD in political science, I wasn't traditionally studying that field. It was more of an interdisciplinary approach to a lot of these meteorological problems.
Yeah, and a deeply philosophical one. I mean, you could have taken so many directions with that. You could have easily studied geopolitics. Like where you were situated, you were dealing with that as your bread and butter. And the fact that you went deep dive into like essentially ontology, like what is the object? Like let's define what is weather. that is it's honestly true, Owen. Like what's the most challenging thing you can do? But I really appreciate that. And I think that there are a lot of things we can learn by looking across fields and seeing the similar kinds of challenges and trying to pull those through. So, okay, you really set yourself up here with an interesting career and background after you graduated. You did some time working in the private sector, and it was a really interesting niche. And this is your last waypoint before we get to you coming to the Weather Service. Tell us about what that was. What was that about? What was that opportunity?
Yeah, it was another thing out of left field that I wasn't planning on. But basically, um, I had some contacts and I knew some people who were working in the AI space. And I became aware of this new startup called Anduril, Anduril being the sword of Anduril from the Lord of the Rings movies. Um, it's a startup company that was founded by Palmer Luckey, who was the Oculus VR goggle guy. And after he was fired from Facebook, and there was a whole backstory to that, but he wanted to take a lot of his funds and think about what can I do to better the world. And in his eyes at the time, um, he wanted to develop a way to truly punch a hole through the DoD contracting space. In other words, on the surface, he wanted to start a company that uses AI to develop the next generation of defense technology. But at a deeper level, he was like, the best way to help the world isn't just that. It's taking the very archaic DoD contracting world and the money pit that it is and flip it around on its head. In other words, invest private money into developing technology that can be sold off the shelf for a fraction of the cost with people who actually are technologically savvy and very, very into the work. So he founded the company Anduril. And it's the company behind the Altius drone, by the way, which was one of the contenders for the Hurricane drones that are autonomous and can fly into hurricanes, right? So that's the tie into the weather community, and so that's one of the ways I heard about the company. So anyway, I basically interviewed with them. It was this crazy process of 5 layers of interviews, and I've never worked for a private company before, other than an internship at the Weather Channel, and so I this was brand new for me, right? But I was intrigued by it, and I ended up accepting the offer. I worked for them for a year. Um, I learned the art of working for a startup, and what I thought was fast is now not fast enough. And the move fast and break things mentality truly is the modus operandi for a startup, right? And so they would rather fix up a problem later than to waste even a day on overthinking. And so um, I learned a lot in that position, but I wasn't fully leveraged for my meteorological expertise. And so for me, um, it was a good experience in kind of branching out. And I've always offered the advice to my mentees of, if you're too comfortable, you're not growing. Step outside of the box every once in a while. So I took my own advice to heart and I did that. And I don't regret any of it because I learned a lot. But I also knew that I wasn't going to be a forever private sector kind of guy because I've always been more public service minded. And so when the WCM position opened up, I read the job description and it pretty much was like exactly me. I didn't even have to tailor my resume, to be honest. Um, I'm not sure if I submitted one. I'm not sure if I wrote a cover letter because it kind of was already like there, all on paper, right? And so an all hazard center where someone who has experienced all sorts of the whole range of weather hazards and different sort of decision making challenges could come, like, to me it was another soup to explore, right? It's a center dedicated to all the things that don't get names, that doesn't get much attention, and yet kills the most people, right? And to me, that was like IDSS challenge to the fore. And so that, on top of the fact that they truly wanted to do a national search, so it wasn't just going to be hiring from within NWS. It was truly like open to the public. I was like, all right, I'm gonna just throw my name in the hat and see what happens. And in hindsight, it was my very, very non-traditional journey through the weather enterprise. Turned out to be a good thing given where WPC is positioned right now. So yeah, that's been my last year. So here we are, or last 2 years.
Yeah. Well, something that was another waypoint, I think, in your decision process, as you were working with that private company, you also started another venture. It's something that we've talked about on this show a lot, is how much our weather enterprise is changing and how much there is now in the digital meteorology space. There are a lot of, we've talked about like the YouTubers, the TikTokers, like there are a lot of people who are spreading sometimes bombastic interpretations of what a forecast can be. And for those of us who are concerned with the bottom line public safety mission to make sure that people can make well informed decisions, this can look like another kind of soup. This one a little bit less palatable even than probably the geopolitics of navigating, North Korea, China forecasts, or at least something approximating as unpleasant at times. And I have to point to you as someone who, I think, you looked at that space and you also were feeling similar feelings, I think, to a lot of us, and you decided to try to do something about it. Tell us about that, because I think that was also a part of your leaning to try to get back into the public sector.
Yes, exactly. So I have thought for many years, watching the digital space transform and how the algorithm works, in air quotes, whatever platform that may be. It tends to reward extreme clickbait, right? And I think we all know that, versus actual science or reliable sources. And so what I came to realize was that the traditional mode of thinking for official agencies, be it government or even some private sector companies, of basically standing by official statements but not engaging the public directly, that was actually harming our messaging. And it really came to the fore this past summer. And I've thought about this for many years, but after the Texas floods, where you can go on Instagram, and I vividly remember going on Instagram and just typing Texas, and one of the first search results that came up was rainmaking, weather modification, right? Like, all of those conspiracy theories were so popular that it drowned out any legitimate source or science. In fact, it wasn't even searchable. I could not find any legitimate source on a platform like Instagram, right? And so I had thought about this for many years, but in all of my outreach efforts, people have said, because I have a passion for conveying. So one of my personal philosophies when it comes to training and outreach is I always say, this is actually etched in my going away plaque from JTWC. Um, if you know the why, you never have to memorize the how. And so we talk a lot about personal development and knowing your why. I like to think of it as we need to explain the why behind weather, how it works, the why behind the weather enterprise, how the forecasting process works. These are things that people actually crave, but don't know that they crave it. Because whenever they approach that topic, it's either too technical or they have someone really monotone who is just lecturing them, right? And unfortunately, the history of science, we have a lot of the latter. And so I came to realize that there has to be a better way, or at least an attempt by the community of actual weather experts to engage in a way that keeps up with the times. And so I thought about it and I was like, you know what? If you think on YouTube, historically, you have personalities that represent certain fields of science. You have Neil deGrasse Tyson in astronomy and astrophysics. Bill Nye is an engineer. I've seen him speak in person at Cornell because he's also a Cornell alumnus. Amazing speaker, right? He's an engineer at heart. Jane Goodall, biology, right? A lot of these figures, and then I thought about it and I was like, there really is no YouTube expert in meteorology that truly like is also a scientist at heart, right? So I'm not talking about like the viral videos that are being created or that are focused more on the either the storm chasing or even the real time weather forecasting, but really more like a Star Talk type podcast or channel. There's none of that in meteorology, and yet we are the most visible of the sciences, right? It's this glaring gap in our field, and so I basically, in about a frustration, but also years of pent up motivation, on the eve of the big beautiful bill passing Congress, which I can see out my window, I launched my YouTube channel, and I basically was like, I really, really want to package a a way to bring the weather enterprise to people who are just genuinely curious, who want to learn about how weather works with actual dynamics, but conveyed and presented in a way that anyone with a college education can understand it, right? In any field. And then also lift the veil behind the forecast process. Um, I see that we spend a lot of time debating the merits of what we call certain terms or forecast thresholds and things like that. And yet I see myself taking a step back and being like, okay, most people don't even know the difference between a watch and a warning, right? Like, what are we doing about that? Right. And so I'm trying to fill that gap. And so the shirt I'm wearing right now, Untamed Skies, is actually that. I registered it as an actual entity. Untamed Skies is the YouTube channel name. I have 20 videos on there, 5 regular form, and then the rest are shorts. I'm trying to learn my way through balancing these short form video explainers, but then also the longer form deep dives. And just last week, I posted a video on explaining the stadium effect in the hurricane eye wall because that got a lot of attention. But nobody seems to explain it in terms of thermal wind relation and conservation of angular momentum. Like I learned about that in grad school, but I also thought about there's no reason why that has to stay in grad school, right? Why does that have to stay and die in my class notes? Why can't it be explained in a way that could be digestible by people, right? So I used figure skaters. I used Alexander Hamilton references from his journal about experiencing a hurricane eye. I used all sorts of creative ways to try to tie these two natural laws together in a 5-minute video that actually explains the stadium effect. And so I'm planning on doing this for a whole bunch of things, like what's the jet stream? What exactly is the polar vortex? In a way that's actually enticing for the public viewer. And so it's a personal pet project at this point, but I also wanted to like do it for real. So I didn't want to just hold up a whiteboard and do it. So I've actually invested some of my personal funds into this effort. A good friend of mine, he does video editing for pretty high level political figures, and so he's assisting with some of the video editing. And then also, his name is Scott Brown. Give him a shout out. And then also Anna Eshelman. She was a graphics editor for climate.gov before that page was discontinued. And so I brought her on, and she's been helping with some of the actual graphic designs. So if you see some of the figures look a lot like some of the really nice figures from climate.gov, that would be why. I've built a little team, still trying to see what sticks. But basically, this is my way of personally trying to do something. I don't know if this is the solution. I don't know who will be that figure on YouTube someday that can represent and carry the torch of our field. But I think we really need to fill that space that's otherwise being taken up by conspiracy theories or by people who can attract more clicks and less of the science.
Oh, and I think you're fascinating. I mean, I have thoroughly enjoyed this entire conversation, and there's a few things that have stood out to me. First of all, um, you're so smart, and you just continue to eat up the learning. Like, you have not stopped learning, I think, since you probably came out of the womb. You just came out and just started wanting to learn and do new things. Um, you love people and you want to help people. And I was really struck by, when you were traveling and you were talking, and meeting survivors. I love that. And, learning their stories. And I think that every little piece that you've done on your journey has led you to this point where you have kind of come full circle and you're like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this YouTube. And what's awesome and encouraging, and I think a lot of young people need to hear, is that you have covered so many different things in your life, in your young life, and just going through but you have this desire to learn and do different things and to take risks and follow your passions. And I think that, it's been a hard year for especially young people, especially those in college who have been going, okay, this has always been my passion. I don't know what I can, they want to almost feel like they want to give up. I want you to, though, because you're such a joy, and take your passion and encourage our audience, because we have a lot of young people. They're, high schoolers, they're college students. Maybe they graduated and they're sitting here going, I don't feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But you have been, and you continue to learn. How can you encourage them?
That's a great question, and thank you for that. Yeah, I've always been very, very passionate about mentoring the next generation, and my biggest message has always been um, lean in. Given all that's been going on in our field and the world at large, I've always been a strong believer in jumping into a system, diving in, and then trying to affect change from within. Um, that's something that I truly had to learn when I dug into kind of the social sciences, where perhaps unfortunately a lot of that field is dominated by critique, right? There's a lot of just critical work critiquing systems, but not a lot of work being done to fix it, right? And so to me, that was always a pet peeve of mine. And I see that sort of shouting without much action to be counterproductive, because it antagonizes people, and it convinces people to run the other way, when in fact we need more people to run this way, because that's where the fire is. Right. And so in a way, I'm kind of like, the message I would give for anyone who's ever discouraged is that the thing that's making you discouraged is probably the thing that could most use you. Um, in what way really depends on the circumstances, but it's incumbent on all of us to try to find what it is that um, excites our passion intellectually, and as well as our curiosity, but then also like, what can we do about it? And so when it comes to young meteorologists who may be listening to this and wondering if this field is the place to be, um, It is, but it may take some creativity, right? The traditional meteorology degree of going through your courses and then competing for a job and then being a forecaster, that's gone, right? But that doesn't mean that the meteorology field is gone. We just have to evolve with the times. And so I vividly remember in school, the big thing was coding, right? If you could minor in computer science or math, do it. It'll help you in grad school. I almost wish I did not take that advice at the time, right? Because that advice was great for 20 years ago. Um, Coders are being put out of work by AI now, right? Like we're seeing this even in the private sector. And so, but what's not being replaced is people who can communicate, people who can build trust, people who can help a person who has to bear the burdens of decision making decide what action to take about something. Those are things that those decision makers aren't going to give up to AI, right? And so I'm seeing that there's value in that as like a long-term, whether it be interdisciplinary or some sort of extracurricular pursuit, whatever it is, the communication side, the outreach side, to me, that's basically that's quickly becoming the bread and butter. And in NWS language, it's IDSS, right? That is being driven by this transformation as well.
Owen, I've got 27.3 million questions for you, but unfortunately, we're out of time. I mean, no. You're a smart guy, so let's say that on your YouTube channel, you put up just a marvelous, technical, wonderful meteorology video. You're good. You're a good communicator. You're well spoken. You're good. You're perfect demographic for this. First comment. I saw him spray in the skies yesterday. You're a liar. You're being paid by the government. We know you control the weather. You got 48 hours to stop lying or you're in grave danger. How are you going to handle that? What do you do? And in all seriousness, what do you do with it? Because I deal with this every single day. What do you do with it?
Yeah, great question. So the very first video that I posted, believe it or not, was one I received a comment like that. Now, it happened to be from an acquaintance. So, in other words, I know a little bit about his background. And so, what I did was I leaned in and I basically said, "Oh, where did you see that?" And so, I actually had him share with me the source of where they got that information. And then I leaned in further and go, "Okay, so how do you think of what makes you think that this is true?" Okay. And at that point, I was able to fill in the gaps, at least in my understanding of this person's perspective, right? And then step three for me was because I know a little bit about his background, it's someone in the fitness industry. I was able to go, all right, metaphor to something that they're familiar with, right? And so I realized that in this conversation, the only way to break through that thought was to use that person's language. And so I knew that that person, just scrolling his Instagram feed, right? I realized that, okay, fitness coach who's really passionate about fitness, the science behind it even, and actually rails against people who think that you can only accomplish something in fitness by taking drugs or doing some sort of medication, right? Things like that. And so I was like, okay, what is that metaphor in the meteorology world? And I basically was like, think about even if we could control the weather, how much rain can come from cloud seeding? And I basically said that even if we were able to succeed in causing the rain to happen without all the winds surrounding the moisture convergence, right? The pooling of the moisture, it would never be able to rain as much as it did. And I basically was like, it's a lot like an athlete that someone doesn't fully understand. So therefore, immediately blames them for being for doping, right? without actually seeing their training process is a lot like a non-meteorologist looking at such an incredible water rise and going, that must be man-made. So I use that analogy, and he immediately changed his mind. Like, that was the only thing that could get to him, was he was like, oh, I've never thought of it that way. And so that got him thinking, and he was like, okay, so there's more to this. I'm not going to convince him to now be interested in meteorology, right? And to actually like study it. But at least I was able to convince him to know that there's more to the story, just like in his own field, an external critique of a superior athlete must having to dope, right, is also a similar sort of misunderstanding.
This is outstanding. No, we need to get this guy back on the show, Kim. All right, this guy's good. I mean, this has been outstanding. But we have to take a break before we do that. So you're apparently a fitness buff. You're a very well buffed man. So what are you back squatting these days? What's your back squat record?
I don't really have a record. I am also getting older, so my knees aren't keeping up anymore. So I am. I don't have a record. I would say
I'm an old man, and this is the only thing I can brag on at the gym. I back squatted 200. Now for you back squat 400 probably, but for an old man, 200's not bad for an old man.
It used to be 300 something. I've never hit 400.
Yeah, there you go. I bet you he's done 400. Having said that, I hate this. Wow. We have to take a break. We're going to hear from Tony Rice and his astronomy report. We're going to hear from Jen in This Week in Tornado History. And we're going to come back with picks of the week and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
Last week, an Airbus directed operators not to fly the A320 family of aircraft until an issue with the elevator aileron computer had been resolved. For most, the process was relatively straightforward and quick. Simply roll back to the previous software release. For about 1,000 worldwide, a hardware replacement was necessary. The cause of all of this? Solar storms. No, really. That was the finding from an investigation into an October 30th incident where a JetBlue flight from Cancun to Newark suddenly lost altitude. Looking back, there were G1 geomagnetic storm watches and warnings issued by the Space Weather Prediction Center around the time. Several of the missions that the SWPC uses to measure energy properties in the solar wind were also recording high flux levels. This indicates high energy particles are bombarding the Earth. These particles can cause false readings from sensors, corrupt data or code, even cause reboots. Electrical engineers know these as single event upsets. Computer scientists, we just call them bit flips. Those high energy particles can actually flip a 1 to a 0 or vice versa. This normally isn't a problem for aircraft though, especially flying in the tropics where they are well protected by the Earth's magnetosphere. But we're still in the throes of a solar maximum, so activity remains high. This isn't a problem for spacecraft, even those operating on Mars where the magnetic field there is long gone, and even spacecraft like Juno operating in a radiation hellscape like Jupiter. It does just fine too. Juno, each of those Mars rovers and landers in the last couple of decades, and even recent missions like the James Webb Space Telescope and Europa Clipper, they guard against bit flip using a RAD 750 processor. This is a radiation-hardened single-board computer that's manufactured by BAE Systems, specifically for use in spaceflight. They're designed to be operated between -55 Celsius up to 125 Celsius, on just 5 watts of power, all while being blasted with 100,000 rads, or about 100 times what it would take to kill you or me. So, why don't the aircraft manufacturers use these radiation-hardened chips? They're using a different instruction set. The RAD 750 is a toughened version of the PowerPC 700 series, which came out in the mid-90s. It was used in Mac PowerBooks and in those desktop iMacs that came in the fruity translucent colors. Yeah, it's that old. But old and reliable is especially prized by spacecraft designers. Reason is that each one of those RAD 750s will run you about $375,000. An aircraft, especially the fly-by-wire kind, they use a lot of computers. And that's exactly how they normally deal with anomalies like this. Redundancy. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, we look back to the early morning hours of December 3rd, 1978, when 13 twisters were recorded. The strongest was an F4 that developed at 1:50 in the morning in the Central Park area of Bossier City, Louisiana. According to the National Weather Service in Shreveport, it was spawned by a supercell that formed in deep East Texas ahead of a squall line. Thomas Gerzoulis noted that it developed near the point where an F2 tornado had ended the previous April. The tornado moved to the northeast, crossing Interstate 20 and striking businesses and homes along Benton Road and Airline Drive before entering the Meadowview area. Parts of Meadowview Elementary School were destroyed, and several 700-pound I-beams were carried several hundred feet and driven into the ground. On Ladon Drive, an automobile was thrown into a home, tragically killing sisters Jana Lynn and Lisa Renee Carrington, ages 8 and 13. The National Guard Armory and the Northwest Louisiana State School were destroyed, and additional home damage occurred in the Stockwell Place and Carriage Oaks areas. The tornado lifted near Red Chute Bayou after causing more than $100 million in damage. Following the event, Ted Fujita, along with Robert Abbey and James McDonald, surveyed the damage with National Weather Service official Ernest Etheridge. Fujita's preliminary report detailed the behavior of the storm, including airborne I-beam missiles traveling up to 350 meters, a core radius reduced to 50 feet, tangential winds estimated over 150 miles per hour, and peak destructive winds lasting only 1 to 2 seconds.
Just maybe, you have some email to go through this week.
We do. First of all, thank you, John Gordon, for helping last week as I had some kind of weird sinusy thing, and I was in bed before WeatherBrains started. I needed some sleep, and I am back at it this week with our email of the week. And this came in on November 20th from Greg, just wondering what the panelists' thoughts are about the information in this article. And it's a Washington Post article. Is this stuff that others are looking at, and do they agree with the information? So I think Owen should weigh in because if you've not done a podcast episode on this, you might want to. But the article is about why an unusual phenomenon will cause a frigid December in the U.S. And it's talking about stratospheric warming and how it could disturb the polar vortex. And so I think, there's a lot of interest in those type of things. And, people hear those big words, is this fake? Is this real? And, people use the polar vortex. I remember, 10 years ago, it was like this big thing. Oh, the polar vortex is going to get you. And that type of a thing. And it's the misinformation that we keep talking about. And so I'm just curious to see, what do y'all think about this type of an article? And it was, just answering his question about this. Is this something we should learn about?
I think we should, but I do not mind passing that off to Owen.
Yeah.
About just stratospheric warming, or you're in terms of like these like keywords in our field that get latched onto?
I think both. I think he's, his question just, what did we think about this? Is this stuff that folks that we are looking at as meteorologists, do we agree with the information? I think that, that type of a thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of, so I've actually had quite a few of my non-meteorology friends just ask me whether or not a specific term, like atmospheric river is another one, is it really a thing, or is it hype, right? So anyone who digs even a slight layer deeper knows when to be on alert for hype or clickbait, right? Nobody likes clickbait, and yet we all fall for it. And so I think demystifying some of these terms appropriately would be really helpful. I always have to say that, polar vortex, atmospheric river, stratospheric warming, these things are actual things. They're not made up.
Yep.
A superstorm is made up, but that's for other reasons, right? And so how to distinguish between actual science words that may or may not be used properly versus a word that's made up for the hype. I think that itself is a worthy pursuit.
Yes. That is awesome. See, I'm so glad you're on the show to answer that question. That was fantastic. No, that's awesome. And thank you, Greg, for writing that, sending that to us. We didn't get a whole lot of email this week. So folks, challenge for you. You got to get us the emails in here. we want to see stuff internationally as well. So John Gordon can answer your questions. He's very much about the international emails, but email at weatherbrains.com. And we would love to get those in. Thank you so much for everyone watching us and listening and being a fan of the show.
All right, so we're going to do picks of the week. This is where everybody goes around the horn and shares something cool, weather related. This can be a data source, can be a website, hardware, software, anything remotely related to weather that's cool. So let's go to our. We have this is cool. We have two WCMs on the show tonight. Rick Smith is one of them out in Oklahoma. So Rick, what's on your mind? Give us a good pick.
In the spirit of leaning forward and learning and expanding your horizons, we've probably had this pick before, but the Warning Decision Training Division branch of the National Weather Service is in our building in the Weather Center. They train every single Weather Service meteorologist in the country. They're getting ready to start some new training next year that's going to be exciting. But if you ever wanted to learn more about radar or how warnings are issued, the radar applications course is the course that every meteorologist has to take. But all that material is available on the WDTD website that anybody can access. You can view the modules, you can take advantage of all the training. It's not going to make you a meteorologist or an expert necessarily, but if you want to dig into it a little bit deeper, there's just a gold mine of information on their site. So that's my pick.
Outstanding. And we will remind everybody, all of these picks will be up on the website in the show notes, weatherbrains.com. Let's go to Commissioner Kim for her pick of the week. Kim?
Well, I have to admit, I feel bad, Owen, if in my introduction I embarrassed you with the charming personal stories, and it's hard not to be amazed by you as a friend of you, and I think that all of these things that you do are so fun. In that spirit, I'm going to continue to share one more thing that you've done that is fun and that we didn't even have room in the show to discuss. But Owen was actually an extra in a big production, a movie, Midway. And so my pick of the week is the movie Midway. And Owen has an appearance. He can tell us exactly when it occurs in the movie, but just another of the fun, random things our WCM at WPC has done.
Wow. So we've got two Hollywoods. We got both WCMs have been in Hollywood productions here. I mean, this is outstanding. Wow. And that's what happens when you make it to a WCM level. You get in Hollywood. All
just
right.
One of the perks. Just one of the perks.
There you go. So my pick of the week, I don't know if you saw this. Our friend John Banghoff sent this in from up in Pennsylvania, but they have had this snow squall driving simulation, which is fascinating to me. And there is a web version. If you don't have the VR headset, now if you got the VR headset, they've got one for that too, and I do not. But anyway, I thought that was fascinating. Our friends up at National Weather Service and State College developed that. All right, Troy Kimmel, give us a pick of the week. What you got?
I'll take it one step further because I think Rick brought up that, and I'm sure Owen would agree with this. But you really want an interesting place to go. We haven't given it a plug lately, but our friends at Comet Met Ed. What a website they have and all the coursework. And I send students there just have some interest in maybe the Skywarn stuff. They have some basic Skywarn classes. It's all ranked by difficulty. You can set up a transcript. I really like the Comet Met Ed website. And
if you don't keep learning, you fall behind fast in this business. In fact, today I was working on my the CBM renewal that's coming up, and you have to have your portfolio in order of what you've learned and what you've done. And I think that's a good thing because I'm telling you, as I get older, I know how much let me rephrase that. I know how much I don't know. And so you got to keep learning. And that Comet Med Ed is outstanding.
Yep.
Dr. John Gordon, sir, what's your pick of the week?
Yes, sir, Eagle. So how about this? We had the Fitzgerald a few weeks ago. We had a Fox weather correspondent. We had the coastal weather. And Owen, you're a rock star. All right. You did a great show. And we're going to see you next week. Speaking of learning, my pick of the week is This Old Dog Learned Something. I love weird weather terms. Love them. I like the Levante. I like the haboob. I like these weird weather terms. But I learned a word this week from KCRA, Heather Waldman out in California. That fog that sits in the Central Valley, I just called it fog my whole life, but they call it the Thule fog, Tule. I never heard that in my life. Look it up and learn about fog. You too can become a weather nerd like me.
Wow. I'm old as dirt. I've never heard that term. So you see, you learn something. Only on this show do you get this information. This is good stuff right here. All right, Jen, give us a pick of the week. Go.
So our friend Mark Sudduth, Hurricane Track, just started today a brand new show. He's doing a daily live show on YouTube. Starts at 10 o'clock, and it's Talking Weather with Mark Sudduth. And it starts at 10 o'clock in the morning and goes until whenever. And I just wrote to him. He is going to join us in a couple of weeks to talk all about his new show. I love his concept. And I also like the fact that I get to be on it. I'm going to be on it every week. And there's a segment called Let's Check In with Jen. And it's the whole nomad thing. Where's Jen this week? And I get to kind of pull in the whole nomad life. Where is Jen? Am I at a conference? Am I in my mom's basement? Am I in Wichita? We're going to talk about whatever and really pull in the tornado history and the people. And I'm hoping to get an opportunity to, I don't know, maybe show up on the show from a diner. And we're talking, tornado history with the people that are sitting at the diner. I don't know. I've got all these ideas in my mind, and I love partnering with Mark on this. So, but he'll be on in a couple of weeks to talk about all about the show. But check it out. And I've got the link to show number 1 as my pick of the week.
And again, all these picks will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com, under show notes. Okay, Owen, we've stalled long enough. You, sir, I know you got something special. So what you got for us?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't actually share the link to the YouTube channel, Untamed Skies. So I would like to recommend that to everyone. And then a classic YouTuber line, please subscribe and like. But more importantly, because I'm still new to this, I genuinely would love feedback and also your ideas. So if there's something like stratospheric warming or something that you see the public has an appetite to learn, I will add that to the queue of things that I will make videos on. I will steer clear of real-time weather forecasting because that space is already quite saturated. I also don't want to take away from broadcast meteorologists who should be doing that, and also official sources, right? Because we don't need more noise added to official sources. What I'm trying to do is to truly level up the education and understanding behind how everything works. So I'll be producing more informative segments, right, instead of actual forecasting. So I'll share the link with the group here, and yeah, would love your feedback.
So everybody go and subscribe. And by the way, Owen, you are now the official WeatherBrains security officer. I bet you Owen can win any bar brawl he gets in. I'm just saying that this guy looks like all we have to do is scream security, and he's going to jump in and carry us out on his shoulders. But no, this has been an amazing show, and we've got to get Owen back because I've got 10 million questions I don't have a chance to ask here. But we got to wrap this thing up. If you are new here, we are typically on the air Monday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. And you can watch us. Most people listen, but you can watch it live or watch it later on the WeatherBrains YouTube channel, youtube.com/WeatherBrains. If you want to get in touch with us, and we love that email, send us one this week. Jen and John, they want to hear from you, especially if you're outside of this United States. Email at weatherbrains.com. Comments, shows, suggestions, anything. We'd love to hear from you. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and God bless. That was a good show.
Awesome. Thank
Great
you,
show.
Owen.
That was awesome.
Thanks, Owen.
Yeah, thanks
Owen,
for
we'll
having
see
me.
you next week, Owen.
Yeah,
Owen's
next
a
week
rock
I'll be
star.
Speaking on behalf of NWS.
Yep. Got that weather service hat
Wear
on.
a different shirt.
Yeah, I'll have a
Different
different
shirt.
Yes.
Just remember, security, jump in there and carry us out.